Welcome to Ink and Evidence, where silence tells stories, and every clue brings us closer to the truth. From chilling crime cases to unsolved mysteries and secrets the world tried to forget, we uncover what lies beneath. If you dare to question, if you seek the truth, then you're exactly where you need to be. Tell us where you're watching this video from. Your feedback always inspires us. Stay tuned to solve the mystery, because the truth always leaves a trace.
Let's begin today's story. The Butler in Disguise. Chapter 1. Who arrived at Ashcroft Manor before midnight. The snow began before dusk, soft as sifted flour, falling over the black yews and the long, sleeping lawns of Ashcroft Manor. By 10 o'clock, the house seemed less built than remembered, its gables and chimneys blurred beneath winter's quiet hand. Inside, every fire had been lit. In the drawing room, flamelight moved gently over old portraits, silver candlesticks, and the polished curve of a grand piano no one had played for years. 5 guests sat beneath the ticking of the mantel clock, each pretending not to listen for the road. Sir Edmund Ashcroft had summoned them all with a letter written in his thin, exact hand. "Come before midnight," it had said. "After that, the truth belongs to whoever is already inside." No one had understood it. No one had dared ignore it. At 11:30, Sir Edmund was found dead in the library. The locked library. The door had been locked from within. It was Mrs. Vale, the housekeeper, who discovered him after bringing his usual glass of warm brandy and finding no answer to her knock. When the door was forced, the guests entered reluctantly, as though the room itself were a chapel. Sir Edmund sat behind his desk, head bowed slightly, one hand resting on a sealed envelope. The fire burned low. The windows were fastened. No weapon lay in sight. Only one thing seemed out of place. A shallow line of melted snow glistened on the dark wooden floor, just inside the French doors that opened to the terrace. Inspector Laurent, who had arrived earlier as one of the invited guests, stood very still. A small man with silver hair and patient eyes, he looked not at the body first, but at the snow. "Someone entered," whispered Lady Marple, Sir Edmund's niece. Laurent bent and touched the wet line with one gloved finger. "Perhaps," he said softly, "or perhaps someone wished us to think so." The clock before midnight. The clock on the mantel read 20 minutes to 12. Yet the long case clock in the hall had already struck midnight. A murmur passed through the room. Mr. Harlan Reed, Sir Edmund's solicitor, dabbed his forehead with a handkerchief. Miss Clara Venn, the late man's ward, stared at the sealed envelope with pale, fixed eyes. Colonel Bramwell stood by the fire, his jaw tight, his boots leaving faint, damp marks on the rug. Laurent noticed those marks. "Colonel," he asked, "have you been outside this evening?" "Only from the carriage to the door." "In riding boots?" Bramwell looked down. "Habit." Laurent smiled faintly, as if habits were among the most revealing crimes of all. Mrs. Vale crossed herself. "Sir Edmund changed the hall clock this morning," she said. "Put it forward by 20 minutes, said the house had kept bad time long enough." Laurent's gaze lifted. "Ah," he murmured. Then midnight arrived early at Ashcroft Manor. The envelope on the desk. The envelope was addressed in Sir Edmund's hand, to be opened only when all are present. "All," said Laurent, "is a very dangerous word." He broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet. Sir Edmund had written that one among them had visited Ashcroft Manor 10 years earlier, on the night his son vanished in a storm. That person had lied ever since. Tonight, before midnight, he intended to name them. The room settled into a deeper silence. Clara Venn pressed her fingers to her lips. Lady Marple looked toward the window, where snow whispered against the glass. Harlan Reed gave a dry little laugh that comforted no one. "Then someone silenced him," said the colonel. "No," Laurent said gently. "Someone was afraid he would speak too soon." He turned the paper over. On the back was one line unfinished. "The first to arrive was not the first to knock." Footprints in the snow. They went to the terrace with lanterns. The snow lay smooth beyond the French doors, except for one set of footprints leading from the side garden toward the library, then away again into darkness. They were large, deep, and oddly spaced. Bramwell, Harlan muttered. The colonel's face reddened. I never crossed that terrace. Laurent crouched beside the prince. Snow gathered on the shoulders of his coat. He studied them for a long time, then rose with the expression of a man listening to music no one else could hear. These footprints are too honest, he said. Lady Marple frowned. Honest. They show everything, too clearly. Real footsteps in falling snow blur at the edges. These were pressed after the snowfall eased. He glanced at the colonel's boots, and made by someone wearing boots too large. From the doorway, Clara whispered, "Then the murderer is still inside." Laurent turned back to the warm glow of the manor. "My dear Miss Venn," he said, "the murderer was always inside. The guest who came early." In the morning room, Laurent asked each guest when they had arrived. Lady Marple, 10:15 with her maid. Harlan Reed, 10:40 by motorcar. Colonel Bramwell, 11 in a hired trap. Clara Venn, before dinner, having lived at Ashcroft for 6 years. Mrs. Vale, always there like the walls themselves. "And you, Inspector?" asked Harlan sharply. Laurent smiled. "Invited at 9, arrived at 9:30. I was expected as a guest, not needed as a policeman, a rare luxury." Then he turned to the housekeeper. "Mrs. Vale, who arrived before all of us." She hesitated. "The piano tuner, sir, in the afternoon. Sir Edmund sent for him." "The piano has not been tuned," said Laurent. "No, sir, he left before supper." "Did he?" The fire gave a soft collapse. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard sighed. Clara's face had gone very white. "The music room." Laurent found the answer in the music room. The piano stood near the windows, its lid closed, its black surface reflecting the candles like a pool of midnight. On the stool lay a gray wool scarf, damp at one end. Beneath the piano, almost hidden by shadow, was a small brass tuning key. Laurent lifted it carefully. "This does not belong to a murderer," he said. "It belongs to a disguise." Clara stood in the doorway. "He was not a tuner," she said. "No, he was Thomas Ashcroft." Laurent did not answer at once. Sir Edmund's son, believed dead 10 years before, had returned before midnight, not as heir, not as ghost, but as a frightened man wrapped in another name. "He came to see his father," Clara whispered. "I saw him. Sir Edmund wept. I had never seen him weep." "And then?" "They argued. Thomas said he would not stay. He said someone in this house had profited from his disappearance." The truth by firelight. Laurent gathered them again in the drawing room. The hour was past midnight now, though the hall clock insisted otherwise. Snow pressed against the windows. The manor listened. "Sir Edmund was not murdered by an intruder," Laurent said, "nor by his son. Thomas Ashcroft came early, secretly, and left by the service passage before the storm deepened." Lady Marple's hand tightened around her pearls. "Then who killed him?" Laurent looked at Harlan Reed. "The man who handled Sir Edmund's will. The man who knew Thomas alive would ruin everything. The man whose motorcar never reached the front drive because he was already here." Harlan's mouth opened, then closed. "You arrived before you knocked," Laurent continued. "Through the old orangery door, you heard father and son speaking. Later, when Thomas fled, you entered the library. Sir Edmund recognized you. You frightened an old man already weakened by shock. His heart failed." "That is not murder," Harlan said hoarsely. "No, but your staging of the terrace, your false footprints, your stolen boots, your attempt to accuse another, those are the acts of a guilty soul." The last arrival. At that moment from the hall came a knock. Not loud, not dramatic, only 3 soft taps against the great front door. Mrs. Vale opened it. A man stood outside beneath the snow, thin, bareheaded, wrapped in a dark coat. His face held the faded likeness of the portraits in the hall. Clara stepped forward, trembling. "Thomas." He looked past her, into the room where his father's fire still burned. "I came back," he said quietly, "before midnight." Laurent watched the snow melt from the threshold. "No," he said with great gentleness, "you arrived long before that." And in Ashcroft Manor, where clocks had lied and footsteps had spoken, the truth finally entered, not with thunder, but with the hush of snow settling over a house at peace. Chapter 2. velvet curtains, and the sound of distant thunder. The storm had not yet reached Bellwether Hall, but already the house seemed to be listening for it. Beyond the tall windows, the garden lay silver beneath fresh snow, its hedges and stone urns softened into sleep. Far away over the black ridge of hills, thunder moved like a carriage crossing a bridge. Inside, the lamps burned low, the fires breathed quietly, and the velvet curtains in the drawing room hung heavy and red as though guarding secrets from the night. Madame Celeste Armand, once the finest actress on the London stage, had invited 6 guests to hear the reading of her final will while she was still alive. "It is better," she had said, smiling from her chair by the fire, "to watch the faces of those who inherit." By 10:30, she was dead. The room behind the curtains. They found her in the private theater at the back of the house, seated beneath the painted ceiling of clouds and cherubs, her silver hair arranged perfectly, her hands folded in her lap. The velvet curtains were closed across the stage. The lamp beside her still burned. A porcelain cup of chocolate stood untouched on a small table. No mark disturbed her pale throat, no blood stained her dark gown. She might have been sleeping after a long performance, waiting for applause that would never come. Inspector Abel March, who had arrived as a guest at Madame Celeste's request, stood quietly near the footlights. He was a neat, mild man with observant eyes and a habit of speaking softly, as though truth disliked being startled. "Who found her?" he asked. Her nephew Julian Voss raised a trembling hand. "I did. I came to fetch her for the will." "And the curtains?" "They were like that." March looked at the red velvet. A faint crease ran down one panel, fresh and pale where dust had been disturbed. "Someone touched them recently," he said. The thunder sounded again, nearer now, and every face turned toward the sealed stage. The cup of chocolate. They returned to the drawing room, where firelight trembled across crystal glasses and anxious hands. Madame Celeste's companion, Miss Elian Hart, sat upright on the sofa, her face composed too carefully. Mr. Tobias Quill, the family solicitor, polished his spectacles without putting them on. Mrs. Lenore Pike, the housekeeper, stood by the door, still clutching her ring of keys. Julian Voss paced before the hearth. Beside the piano, silent and pale, stood Vera Lorne, the young singer Madame Celeste had promised to make famous. "The chocolate," March said. "Who prepared it?" Mrs. Pike swallowed. "I did, sir, as always, a little cinnamon, no sugar." "And who carried it?" Miss Hart lifted her eyes. "I carried the tray." "Did Madame drink?" "No, she said the room was too warm. She asked me to open the window in the corridor." March nodded. "And did you?" For a moment, then the thunder began. She disliked storms. Julian gave a bitter laugh. She disliked being ignored. Storms had the bad habit of performing without her permission. No one smiled. March looked into the fire. "Then the cup tells us very little," he murmured. "Sometimes what is untouched speaks louder than what is consumed." The first roll of thunder. At 11, the storm reached the house. Snow tapped at the glass. Thunder rolled overhead, muffled but immense, and the lamps flickered once in their brass brackets. In that brief dimness, someone gasped. The red curtains of the drawing room had moved. Not much, only a soft inward breath, as though the fabric had been touched from behind. March crossed the room and drew them apart. Behind them lay only the tall window, locked from within, its panes cold with winter. But on the sill, beneath the fold of velvet, he found a single white petal. "Lilac," Vera whispered. "In winter?" asked Tobias Quill. "There are dried lilacs in Madame's theater," said Miss Hart. "She kept them from her last performance. She said applause faded but scent remembered." March held the petal in his palm. "The theater," he said, "appears determined to follow us." The scent in the theater. They went back through the corridor, their footsteps muted by old carpets. The theater waited in darkness except for the single lamp beside Madame Celeste's chair. March stood before the closed stage curtains and breathed in slowly. "Lilac," he said. Julian frowned. "The whole room smells of it." "Yes, too much of it." He drew the curtains open. The stage was empty, set with a painted balcony and a moonlit garden from some forgotten play. At the rear stood a narrow door leading to the costume rooms. March crossed to it and found the handle faintly damp. Inside, the air was cold. Costumes hung in rows, Queens, widows, maids, ghosts. Their silks and satins whispered as the house settled around them. On the dressing table lay a broken vial, its last drop staining the wood with violet perfume. Miss Hart turned away. Madame always wore lilac scent on stage. Not always, March said, only when she wished the audience to remember her entrance. He looked at the mirror. In its silvered glass, 5 frightened faces watched him. One face did not. Vera Lorne had remained at the threshold. The hidden script. Behind the mirror, March found a narrow drawer. Inside lay a script bound in blue ribbon. The title page read, "Velvet Curtains and the Sound of Distant Thunder." Beneath it, in Madame Celeste's handwriting, were the words, "Final Performance." The pages were not dialogue, but instructions. At 10:15, enter theater. At 10:20, curtains closed. At 10:25, thunder cue. At 10:30, reveal. Julian stared. She planned this. Part of it, said March. Madame Celeste intended to frighten someone into confession. Confession of what? Tobias asked. March turned another page. The answer was written in one elegant line. The voice that ruined me was not my rival's. It was the child I saved. Vera sank into a chair. Outside, thunder dragged its velvet weight across the sky. The singer's secret. Vera spoke at last, her voice barely above the fire's whisper. She took me in when I was 15, paid for my lessons, gave me a name, gowns, introductions. But years ago, before I knew what she had done for me, I was paid to sing a passage in a private audition. I did not know it would be used against her. Miss Hart closed her eyes. Against Madame. Vera nodded. A critic claimed her voice had failed. Someone arranged for my singing to be heard behind a curtain while Madame stood on stage. When the trick was exposed, she was humiliated. She left the theater. And tonight, March said gently, she meant to reveal who arranged it. Vera looked toward Tobias Quill. The solicitor's spectacles slipped in his hand. This is nonsense. Is it? Asked March. You managed her contracts, you profited when she retired, you controlled the money, the house, the invitations. Tobias grew pale. I never killed her. No, March said, but you feared she would name you. The final performance. March returned to the theater alone, then called them in one by one. The room was colder now. The lamp had begun to fade. Madame Celeste still sat like a queen after the curtain's fall. Observe, he said softly. The windowless room, the untouched chocolate, the broken perfume, the script. We have been looking for violence, but Madame Celeste was a woman of theater. She chose timing, scent, fabric, silence. He lifted her folded hand. Beneath it lay a small glass capsule, cracked and empty. Miss Hart covered her mouth. She was dying already, March said. The doctor told her she had weeks, perhaps days. Tonight she arranged a final scene to expose Mr. Quill, but before she could finish, her heart failed. Tobias exhaled, almost smiling. March turned to him. Unfortunately for you, you believed she had only fainted. You closed the stage curtains, broke the perfume to confuse the time, and later moved the drawing room velvet to suggest some hidden passage. You tried to turn a natural death into a mystery that pointed everywhere except toward the truth she had written. Tobias whispered, "There is no proof." March held up the blue ribbon from the script. Your cuff button was caught in the knot. The last curtain. By midnight, the storm began to pass. Tobias Quill sat silent beneath the gaze of Madame Celeste's portraits, while Julian sent for the constable from the village. Miss Hart wept softly, not from shock, but from the exhaustion of loyalty. Vera stood near the theater door, listening to the fading thunder as though it were applause from a distant house. March drew the velvet curtains open one final time. Beyond the windows, snow fell with patient grace, covering the carriage tracks, the garden paths, the restless marks of the evening. The world outside had become still and white. She did not want revenge, Vera said. No, March replied. She wanted the truth to arrive before the curtain fell. In the private theater, Madame Celeste rested beneath her painted sky, lilac scent lingering around her like memory. And as the last thunder dissolved into the hills, Bellwether Hall settled into quiet, holding its secret no longer, warmed by firelight, softened by snow, and watched over by velvet curtains that would never again need to move. Chapter 3. The butler nobody remembered hiring. The butler was already standing in the hall when the first guest arrived. He was tall, spare, and dressed in black so precise it seemed less worn than arranged. His hair was silver at the temples, his gloves were white, and his voice, when he took Lady Eveline Harrow's coat, was soft enough to vanish into the firelit air. "Welcome to Blackthorn House, madam." Outside, snow drifted over the moor in long, pale veils. Inside, the old house glowed with lamps and polished wood, with winter roses in blue vases and fires burning in every grate. It was the kind of night on which doors should remain closed and familiar faces should be counted twice. By 9 o'clock, all 6 guests had arrived. By 10, Lord Harrow was dead. And by 10 minutes past, no one in the house could remember hiring the butler. The man in white gloves. They gathered in the dining room, where the long table had been set for 7. Lord Harrow sat at the head, untouched by the meal before him, his face calm and gray above his white collar. A glass of claret rested near his hand. The silverware shone. The candles burned steadily. Nothing seemed disturbed except that his chair had been drawn back a little too carefully. Inspector Adrian Vale, invited that evening as an old acquaintance of the family, stood beside the mantel and watched the butler pour coffee with unhurried grace. "What is your name?" Vale asked. "Martin, sir." "And who engaged you?" The butler paused only long enough for the coffee to darken the cup. "His lordship, sir." Lady Eveline lifted her tearful face. "Impossible. Harrow never mentioned it." Mr. Felix Gray, the family solicitor, frowned. "The household accounts show no new wages." Miss Beatrice Lorne, Lord Harrow's niece, whispered, "I thought he had always been here." That sentence settled over the room more heavily than grief. Vale looked at the butler's white gloves. "Did you serve the wine?" "Yes, sir." "And did you drink any?" "No, sir, I'm not in the habit." "Habits," said Vale gently, "are often more revealing than confessions." The dinner nobody ordered. In the kitchen, warmth clung to the stone walls. Copper pans gleamed in rows, and the smell of roasted chestnuts lingered beneath the sharper scent of extinguished gas. Mrs. Pell, the cook, sat rigidly near the range. "I never planned that dinner," she said. "I found the menu card in my book this morning, his lordship's handwriting plain as daylight." Vale read it beneath the lamp. Consommé, trout, pheasant, baked pears, claret from the west cellar. "Did Lord Harrow choose claret often?" "Never with pheasant, sir. He preferred Burgundy." Vale turned the card over. On the back, faintly pressed into the paper, was the mark of another word: confession. He said nothing at once. In the scullery, a narrow window stood ajar, though snow had not blown in. On the sill lay one white thread, caught on a splinter. "From a glove?" asked Beatrice, who had followed him quietly. "Perhaps," said Vale, "or from someone wishing us to think of gloves." A low wind passed through the corridor, and somewhere beyond the kitchen stairs, a bell rang once. No one had pulled it. The silver bell. The bellboard hung in the servants' passage, each small brass label naming a room: library, nursery, dining room, east bedroom. The trembling indicator pointed to the nursery. Lady Eveline drew back. "That room has been locked for 20 years. "Since the child died?" Vale asked. No one answered quickly. Lord Harrow's son had drowned in the frozen pond at the age of 7. Afterward, the nursery had been closed, the toys covered, the key kept in Lord Harrow's study. Martin the butler stood at the end of the passage, his expression composed. "Shall I fetch the key, sir?" Vale watched him. "You know where it is." His lordship kept it in the left drawer of his desk. Felix Gray gave a sharp glance. "How could you know that?" Martin lowered his eyes. "A butler notices what is useful." Vale smiled faintly. "Yes, and what is dangerous?" "The nursery door." The key turned with a sigh. Cold air breathed from the nursery as though the room had been waiting. Dust sheets covered the furniture in pale mounds. A painted rocking horse stood near the hearth. Snowlight lay across the floorboards, and the wallpaper, faded with lambs and blue ribbons, seemed unbearably gentle. On the small bed sat a folded black coat. Not Lord Harrow's. In its pocket, Vale found a silver rattle, tarnished dark. and a photograph of a young nursemaid holding a child beside the frozen pond. Lady Evelyn sat down suddenly. "Anna," she whispered. "The nursemaid?" Vale asked. "She vanished after the accident. Harrow dismissed her. He said she had been careless." Martin stood in the doorway. For the first time, his stillness seemed strained. Vale studied the photograph. Behind the nursemaid, near the garden wall, stood a young man in livery. His face was half turned away, but the posture was unmistakable. The white gloves had aged. The man had not been forgotten by everyone. The butler's shadow. In the library, the fire had burned low. Vale placed the photograph on Lord Harrow's desk. The guests stood in a semicircle, their reflections dim in the dark windows. Snow struck the glass with the softness of fingertips. "Martin," said Vale, "you were once employed here." The butler looked toward the fire. "Under houseman, 22 years ago." "And Anna's?" "My sister." Lady Evelyn closed her eyes. Martin's voice remained quiet. She did not neglect the child. Lord Harrow took him out upon the pond. The ice broke. Anna tried to save him. His lordship let her bear the blame. Felix Grey swallowed. "Then you killed him." "No," Martin said. "I came for the truth." Vale opened the left drawer of the desk. Inside lay a sealed letter addressed to Anna Pell, never sent. The cook gave a small cry at the name. "My maiden name," she whispered. Vale turned to her. "You were Anna." The room seemed to draw one breath. The cook who remembered. Mrs. Pell's face had gone as white as flour. "I stayed because he would not let me leave with my name," she said. "He gave me work under another one, said no house would take a nursemaid whose charge had died. I had no family but Martin, and he had gone abroad." Martin bowed his head. "Tonight," Vale said, "Lord Harrow meant to confess. The menu, the nursery bell, the letter. He invited those whose lives had bent around the lie." Lady Evelyn whispered, "Then who poured the poison?" Vale lifted the claret glass. There was no poison in the wine. He turned it slowly in the light. Lord Harrow died of his own drops, digitalis, taken for the heart, but someone increased the dose in the medicine glass before dinner, not to silence a confession, but to prevent it from being spoken aloud. Felix Grey stepped back. Vale's eyes followed him. "You knew confession would destroy the estate's settlement. You drafted the false dismissal papers. You protected a lie for 20 years and profited from managing its consequences." The last service. Felix said nothing. His silence was answer enough. Outside, the storm softened. The snow fell straighter now, covering the pond beyond the dark lawn, covering the old paths to the nursery window. Martin removed his white gloves and placed them on the silver tray. "I did enter through the scullery," he said. "I rang the nursery bell. I set the coat upon the bed. I wanted him to remember." "He did remember," Vale said. "Too late, perhaps, but enough to write the truth." Mrs. Pell opened the sealed letter with trembling hands. No one asked her to read it aloud. Some confessions belong first to the wounded. In the dining room, the candles had burned low around Lord Harrow's untouched plate. The seventh place remained set, knife and fork aligned, napkin folded like a small white wing. Lady Evelyn looked at Martin. "Who hired you?" she asked softly. He glanced toward the nursery stairs. "No one living, madam." Vale watched the firelight move over the old walls, over grief, guilt, and the strange mercy of truth arriving late. Then the house settled into silence, and Blackthorn, which had remembered everything, seemed at last to sleep. Chapter 4. The missing heirloom beneath the grand staircase. Snow had fallen all afternoon upon Ravensmere Hall, softening the iron gates, the clipped yews, and the long avenue of beeches until the world beyond the windows seemed painted in milk and shadow. Inside, the house glowed with firelight. The grand staircase rose from the marble hall in a graceful sweep of dark oak, its carved banister polished by generations of careful hands. Beneath it stood an old cabinet of black lacquer and brass, rarely opened, always admired. Above it hung the portrait of Lady Seraphine Ravensmere, wearing the family heirloom at her throat, a sapphire pendant shaped like a teardrop, surrounded by diamonds as pale as frost. Tonight, the real pendant was to be shown for the first time in 20 years. By 10 o'clock, it was gone. And beneath the grand staircase, Something in the old house began to creak as though it had been waiting to speak. The empty velvet case. The guests gathered in the winter drawing room, where the curtains were drawn against the snow, and the fire burned with a steady amber hush. Sir Alistair Ravensmere stood by the mantel, holding the open jewel case in both hands. Its blue velvet hollow was empty, pressed faintly where the pendant should have slept. "It was here at 8, he said. "I saw it myself." His sister, Lady Cressida, gave a dry little laugh that carried no amusement. "You saw what you wished to see, Alistair, as usual." Inspector Lucian Gray, invited as a friend of the family and not yet as a policeman, sat quietly in a wing chair with a cup of untouched tea. He was a small, elegant man with calm eyes and a silver watch chain that caught the firelight when he moved. "Who had access to the case?" he asked. Sir Alistair looked around the room. "Myself, Cressida, my son Adrian, Miss Elspeth Vale, our archivist, and Mrs. Morley, the housekeeper." Adrian Ravensmere stood near the window, pale and restless, one finger tracing the frost on the glass. Miss Vale kept her gaze upon the carpet. Mrs. Morley, neat in black, clasped her hands so tightly her knuckles shone. Gray closed the empty case. "Then we begin," he said softly, "not with who could take it, but with who wished the house to notice it was gone." The sound beneath the stairs. They returned to the marble hall. The grand staircase curved above them like the rib of some sleeping creature. Candles burned in wall sconces. Outside, wind stroked the shutters, and the snow made the silence deeper rather than less. Gray knelt beside the black lacquer cabinet beneath the stairs. Its surface showed no dust except one clean crescent where something small had recently rested. "A key," he murmured. Mrs. Morley nodded reluctantly. "The cabinet key, sir. It is usually kept there." "And now, missing." At that moment, from somewhere beneath the staircase came a faint sound. Not a footstep, not a knock. A slow wooden sigh. Lady Cressida stiffened. "The house settles in winter." "Indeed," said Gray, "but houses, like people, settle differently when disturbed." He opened the cabinet. Inside were old gloves, a cracked fan, a bundle of letters tied with gray ribbon, and a shallow drawer lined in green baize. In the drawer lay a single blue thread. Miss Vale leaned forward. "That is not from the case," she whispered. "The case is velvet." Gray lifted the thread carefully. "No," he said. "It is from a dress, or a curtain, or perhaps from a lie beginning to unravel." The portrait of Lady Seraphine. In the gallery, moonlight and firelight mingled uneasily. Lady Seraphine's portrait hung at the head of the staircase, her painted eyes lowered toward the hall below. The sapphire pendant rested against her white throat, vivid as a drop of frozen sky. Gray stood before the painting for a long time. "Your ancestor was very beautiful," he said. "And very unhappy," Lady Cressida replied. "She disappeared after a quarrel with her husband. Family legend says she took the pendant and fled. But the pendant remained." "Yes, found years later beneath the stairs, so the story goes. Hidden by a servant." Miss Vale spoke gently. "Not hidden by a servant. That was added later. The old papers suggest Lady Seraphine herself concealed it before she vanished." Sir Alistair frowned. "Nonsense. Ravensmere women do not crawl beneath staircases." Gray smiled faintly. "No, in my experience, women in danger have crawled through worse places than staircases." A hush followed. Adrian turned from the window. "What danger?" Miss Vale looked up at the portrait. There was a sealed architectural note in the archives, something about a cavity beneath the first landing. Sir Alistair's face darkened. "Those papers are private." Gray's eyes moved from father to son. "Private things often become public," he said, "when jewels disappear." The archivist's candle. Miss Vale's workroom lay beyond the library, a narrow chamber smelling of paper, beeswax, and cold stone. On the desk were maps of Ravensmere Hall, yellowed at the edges, held flat with silver weights. A candle had burned low beside them, leaving a pool of wax shaped like a tear. Gray examined the plans. "There is a void behind the staircase wall." "An old service space," Miss Vale said, "sealed after Seraphine's time." "And you discovered this when?" "This morning." Sir Alistair stared at her. "You did not tell me." I intended to. Then the pendant was announced for display, and I wondered. What? Adrian asked. She hesitated, whether the old story was not a romance but a warning. Gray noticed a smudge on her cuff, gray dust fine as ash. You visited the staircase. Miss Vale lowered her eyes. Only briefly, I found no opening. Yet someone did, Gray said. From the corridor came the soft chime of the hall clock striking 11. Each note drifted through the house like a question asked politely, again and again. The blue thread. Gray asked to see every blue garment in the house. Lady Cressida wore midnight silk. Miss Vale wore gray wool. Mrs. Morley owned no blue dress, only her uniform black. Adrian protested, then reluctantly produced a blue scarf from his coat pocket. It was my mother S, he said. The thread matched. Sir Alistair looked at his son, as though seeing him from a great distance. You? Adrian's voice trembled. I did not steal it. Gray took the scarf, turned it, and found a line of pale dust along one edge. You were beneath the staircase. Adrian closed his eyes. I heard Father telling Cressida he would sell the pendant to cover debts. He had already arranged it. The display tonight was only a farewell performance. Lady Cressida whispered, Alistair. Sir Alistair said nothing. Adrian continued. Mother loved that pendant. She said it belonged to the women of the family, not the men who gambled the roof above them. I wanted to hide it until morning. And did you? Gray asked. No, when I opened the panel, something was already there. The hidden compartment. The panel was found beneath the first curve of the grand staircase, disguised within the carved oak lilies. It opened with a reluctant click when Gray pressed a flower worn smooth by old fingers. Cold air breathed from within. The space beyond was narrow and dark, smelling of dust, stone, and winter. Gray entered with a candle. The others waited in the hall, listening. After a moment, he called for Miss Vale. Inside the hollow, beneath layers of age and silence, lay a small wooden box. Its lock had rusted away. Within it rested not the sapphire pendant, but a bundle of letters, a child's ivory comb, and a miniature portrait of Lady Seraphine holding an infant. Miss Vale read the first letter by candlelight. Seraphine had not fled alone. She had hidden proof that her daughter lived, born secretly and sent away to protect her from a violent husband. The pendant had been left behind as a marker, a promise to be reclaimed by the female line. Lady Cressida touched the wall. Then the heirloom was never merely a jewel. No, said Gray, it was a witness. The housekeeper's secret. Mrs. Morley began to weep before anyone accused her. My grandmother was raised under another name, she said. She told me stories of a blue stone and a lady who had loved her from far away. I thought them fairy tales. Gray watched her kindly, and when Miss Vale found the architectural note, I saw it on her desk. I knew the place. My mother showed me the carved lily when I was a girl. I opened it tonight before dinner. And the pendant. Mrs. Morley reached into her apron pocket and withdrew a folded handkerchief. Inside lay the sapphire pendant, luminous even in the dim hall, its diamonds catching every flame, every breath, every astonished face. I did not mean to steal it, she whispered, only to keep it from being sold. If the letters proved what I believed, then perhaps. Perhaps, Gray said, it was yours. Sir Alistair sank onto the lowest stair. The last light on the sapphire. By midnight, the storm had softened to a gentle fall of snow. In the drawing room, the sapphire rested on the table beside Seraphine's letters. No one spoke loudly. The fire burned low, and the old house seemed warmer for having exhaled a secret kept too long. Sir Alistair signed a paper before Inspector Gray and Mr. Harrow, the family solicitor, agreeing that the pendant would remain at Ravensmere until the claim of Seraphine's line was properly settled. Lady Cressida placed the jewel in Mrs. Morley's hands. For tonight, she said, let it rest with someone who remembers what it meant. Mrs. Morley bowed her head, unable to answer. Gray stood in the hall before departing. Above him, Lady Seraphine's painted eyes seemed no longer sorrowful, only patient. Beneath the grand staircase, the hidden panel sat closed again, its carved lily pale in the candlelight. Adrian walked with Gray to the door. Inspector, who stole the heirloom. Gray looked back at the quiet house, at the snow beyond the glass, at the family gathered softly around the truth. "My dear boy," he said, "no one stole it. It was only missing from the wrong hands." Then the door opened to the winter night, and Ravensmere Hall, wrapped in firelight and snow, settled around its recovered secret like a blanket drawn gently over sleep. Chapter 5. Tea served to the wrong guest. The snow began at dusk, falling softly over Witchwood Lodge until the old house seemed to float in a white and muffled world. Its windows glowed amber against the dark garden, and smoke rose from the chimneys in slow, silver ribbons. Inside, the lamps had been shaded low, the fires were well fed, and the drawing room held that pleasant winter stillness in which even secrets seemed inclined to speak softly. Lady Helena Witchwood had invited 5 guests for tea at 9 o'clock, an hour so unusual that no one arrived without curiosity. On the silver tray were 6 cups of thin porcelain, each painted with violets. By 9:30, one guest was dead, and the tea, it seemed, had been served to the wrong person. The violet cup. Mr. Lionel Drake died in the blue chair beside the fire, one hand resting on his waistcoat, the other curled around a violet cup. No one screamed. The room was too elegant for panic, too warm for violence. The only sounds were the tick of the mantel clock, the faint hiss of snow against the window, and the soft clatter as Lady Helena's spoon slipped from her fingers. Inspector Emile Caro, invited as a distant friend of the family, set down his untouched tea. He was a small, careful man with dark eyes and a voice as calm as folded linen. "Please do not move anything," he said. Mrs. Bell, the housekeeper, stood frozen near the tray. Miss Rosamund Vale, Lady Helena's companion, pressed a handkerchief to her lips. Captain Arthur Sennett stared into the fire. Dr. Miles Harbury bent over Lionel and after a moment shook his head. "Heart failure," the doctor murmured. Caro looked at the cup. "Perhaps," Lady Helena whispered, "that was not his cup." Everyone turned. "It was mine," she said. "The violet cup with the chipped rim. Mrs. Bell always gives it to me." Caro lifted his eyes. "Then, my lady, someone may have intended you to drink what Mr. Drake received." The tray by the fire. The tea tray stood on a low table near the hearth, polished silver reflecting flame, faces, and trembling hands. There were 6 cups, 5 partly drunk, 1 untouched. A small dish of lemon slices glistened beside the sugar tongs. The teapot was still warm beneath its quilted cover. Caro asked each guest to name their cup. Lady Helena's had the chipped rim. Lionel had taken it by mistake while reaching across for sugar. Miss Vale's cup bore a painted crack through one violet leaf. Captain Sennett had refused lemon. Dr. Harbury had taken 2 sugars. Mr. Crispin Witchwood, Helena's nephew, had arrived late and barely touched his tea. Mrs. Bell's hands shook. "I set the cups as always, sir. Her ladyship by the fire, Mr. Drake beside her, the others in order." "Did anyone approach the tray?" "They all did, sir. It was a small table." Caro leaned close to the chipped cup. A faint bitter scent rose beneath the perfume of bergamot. "Not enough to announce itself," he said softly, "only enough to be remembered afterward." Outside, the wind moved along the shutters like fingers searching for a latch. "The guest who changed seats." "It was not meant for Lionel," Crispin said, though no one had asked him. He was young, pale, and handsome in a careless way, with snow still melting on the shoulders of his coat. Lady Helena looked at him with tired affection. "You were late," Caro said. "The lane was nearly impassable. Yet your boots are dry." Crispin glanced down. "I changed them in the hall." "Of course." Caro turned toward the blue chair. "Was Mr. Drake seated there from the beginning?" Miss Vale shook her head. "No, Captain Sennett sat there first. Lionel took the chair when the captain moved nearer the fire screen." Sennett's face tightened. "The draft was at my back." "The draft," Caro murmured, "has caused many small rearrangements in life." Lady Helena closed her eyes. Lionel always wandered. He never sat where one expected. Caro looked at the dead man, then at the chipped cup. "Then the killer either miscalculated," he said, "or knew perfectly well that Mr. Drake would take what was not his." The cabinet of teas. In Lady Helena's morning room, the tea cabinet stood locked beneath a portrait of her late husband. Its little drawers were labeled in neat gold script. Assam, Darjeeling, China Rose, Winter Bergamot. Mrs. Bell produced the key from her apron. "No one uses this cabinet but me," she said. "Keys," Caro replied, "are like promises. They are often copied before they are broken." Inside the Winter Bergamot drawer, he found a paper packet folded too carefully. Its scent was sharp and green beneath the tea. Dr. Harbury examined a pinch beneath the lamplight. "Foxglove," he said quietly. "Digitalis, in quantity dangerous." Lady Helena sat very still. "I take digitalis," she whispered, "for my heart." "Yes," Caro said, "a familiar medicine makes an excellent disguise." Behind him, Miss Vale gripped the back of a chair. Caro noticed. He always noticed what people did when they believed attention had moved elsewhere. On the floor beneath the cabinet lay a small crescent of purple wax. The letter in the desk. The wax matched the seal on a letter found in Lady Helena's writing desk. It was addressed to Lionel Drake and dated that morning, though never sent. Caro read it in silence while the fire breathed quietly behind him. Lady Helena had written that she could no longer protect him. Years earlier, Lionel had persuaded her to invest in a scheme that ruined her sister. The sister had died poor. Her son, Crispin, had been raised at Witchwood Lodge out of guilt and obligation. Tonight, Helena intended to announce that Crispin would inherit everything, while Lionel would receive nothing more. Crispin turned away from the window. "I did not know," he said. "No," Caro replied, "but someone knew enough to fear the announcement." Lady Helena's voice trembled. "Lionel came tonight to beg. For money. For silence. He said old letters could damage us all." Captain Sennett laughed once bitterly. Drake made a profession of borrowed shame. Caro folded the letter. "Then our dead guest was not merely the wrong victim," he said. "He may also have been the right danger." The housekeeper's memory. Mrs. Bell remembered the smallest thing. "It was the lemon, sir," she said suddenly. "Mr. Drake never took lemon, said it spoiled honest tea, but tonight he reached for it." Caro smiled gently. "And why does that trouble you?" "Because Miss Vale sliced it, not me." Miss Vale looked up sharply. "I helped with the tray, that is all." Caro returned to the drawing room and examined the lemon dish. One slice bore a tiny puncture near the rind, almost invisible beneath the glistening pulp. He touched the silver fork and smelled bitterness again. "The poison was not in the pot," he said, "nor even in the cup at first. It was added after the cups were poured." Dr. Harbury frowned. "On the lemon." "Yes, intended for Lady Helena, who always takes lemon in the chipped violet cup." Lady Helena whispered, "But Lionel took my cup." "And then," Caro said, "he took the poisoned lemon because tonight he chose to sweeten what he usually left plain." The wrong guest. Miss Vale began to cry without sound. She had been Lady Helena's companion for 12 years, a quiet woman of soft steps and softer dresses, the kind of presence a house learns to overlook. But grief had stripped the stillness from her face. "I only meant to frighten her," she whispered. "No," Caro said. "You meant to kill her kindly with her own medicine in her own cup beside her own fire." Lady Helena stared at her. "Rosamund." Miss Vale's voice grew steadier, which was worse. "You promised me security. Then Crispin returned and everything changed. I heard you say he would inherit. What was I to become? A paid memory?" An old chair moved to a colder room. The snow tapped gently at the glass. "And Mr. Drake?" Caro asked. He leaned across, he laughed. He said Helena would forgive him before she forgave herself. Then he took her cup. Miss Vale closed her eyes. "I could not stop him, not without showing why." Captain Sennett lowered his head. No one spoke for a long while. The last pouring. Near midnight, the constable was sent for through the snow. Miss Vale sat by the window, composed again, her hands folded as if waiting for morning prayers. Lady Helena remained beside the fire, the chipped violet cup untouched before her. Crispin stood behind her chair, no longer restless, no longer quite young. Caro poured fresh tea from a new pot Mrs. Bell had made with shaking care. No one drank immediately. Outside, the storm softened. Snow gathered on the sill in pale layers, and the garden disappeared beneath its quiet forgiveness. The fire settled low, casting gold across the porcelain cups, the silver tray, the lemon dish emptied of its danger. Lady Helena looked at the place where Lionel Drake had died. "He was not innocent," she said. "No," Caro answered, "but innocence is not required for murder to be a crime." She nodded slowly, accepting the distinction as one accepts winter, unwillingly but with dignity. At last, Mrs. Bell removed the violet cup with the chipped rim and wrapped it in a linen cloth. Caro watched the little cup vanish. "The wrong guest," Crispin murmured. The inspector looked toward the snow-dark window, where the house reflected itself in trembling firelight. "Perhaps," he said softly, "but in a room full of secrets, my dear boy, tea is rarely served to only one person." And Witchwood Lodge grew still around them, warm and hushed beneath the falling snow, while the night kept its silence and the fire burned patiently on. Chapter 6. The Portrait with a Hidden Signature. The portrait arrived at Marley House on a night of snow and low thunder, wrapped in brown paper, tied with black ribbon, and carried by two men who refused to cross the threshold. "It belongs inside before midnight," one of them said. Then they vanished into the white darkness, leaving only wheel tracks that filled slowly beneath falling snow. Inside, the house was warm with coal fires and candlelight. The winter drawing room smelled of beeswax, old books, and oranges studded with cloves. Lady Octavia Marley, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, stood before the covered canvas as though receiving a guest she had not invited but had long expected. Around her gathered the others, her nephew Philip, restless and handsome, Miss Ada Fenn, the quiet art restorer, Mr. Crispin Bell, the family solicitor, Mrs. Rowe, the housekeeper, and Inspector Henry Vale, who had come for dinner and found himself, as often happened, in the company of secrets. Lady Octavia touched the black ribbon. "My husband bought this portrait 40 years ago," she said. "He claimed it was worthless." "Was he wrong?" Philip asked. Her smile was thin. "At Marley House, my dear, worthless things are rarely kept so carefully." When the paper fell away, the firelight revealed a woman in blue satin, seated beside a dark window, one hand resting upon a closed letter. Her face was calm, almost tender, yet her painted eyes seemed to look past the room into some colder place. At the lower corner, where a signature should have been, there was only shadow. The painting by the fire. They placed the portrait above the mantel in the small gallery, where the lamps could be shaded and the fire kept low. Snow brushed the windows with a sound like silk being folded. Inspector Vale stood with his hands behind his back, studying the canvas. "The brushwork is excellent," he murmured. Ada Fenn nodded, "Too excellent for the name attached to it." "What name is attached?" "None, that is the trouble." Crispin Bell cleared his throat. "Lady Octavia believes it may be by Elias Varon." Philip laughed softly. "If it is, we are saved. If it is not, we remain charmingly ruined." Lady Octavia did not look at him. Marley House had debts. Everyone knew it, though everyone had been careful to say so only near fires, windows, and sleeping dogs. Ada moved closer to the portrait. "There may be a signature under the dark varnish, hidden by age or by intention." "Can you reveal it tonight?" Lady Octavia asked. "With care." Inspector Vale noticed then that Crispin Bell's fingers had tightened around his watch chain. Outside, thunder turned behind the hills, slow and distant, like furniture being moved in another world. The solvent room. Ada worked in the old conservatory, which had been cleared of plants and warmed by a little iron stove. Glass walls looked out upon the snow-laden garden. Beyond them, black cedars bent beneath the white weight of winter. The portrait rested upon an easel. Ada dampened a cotton swab with solvent and touched the lower corner of the canvas. The room held its breath. A thin brown film lifted. Beneath it appeared not a signature, but a pale mark, curved and deliberate. "An initial?" Philip asked. "Perhaps," said Ada. Lady Octavia leaned nearer. "Continue." Ada hesitated. If this is deliberate overpainting, someone meant to hide it. "Then reveal what they feared." The swab moved again. Slowly, another stroke emerged, not Varon's familiar signature, but a small symbol like a closed eye. Mrs. Rowe, standing near the door, made a faint sound. Vale turned at once. "You recognize it?" "No, sir." But she had gone pale. A gust pressed snow against the glass. The candle flames trembled. In their wavering light, the painted woman seemed almost to smile. The letter in the painted hand. By 10 o'clock, Ada had uncovered enough to change the room. The symbol beneath the varnish was not a signature alone. It was part of a folded inscription painted into the shadow beside the woman's hand, so cunningly hidden that only careful cleaning could release it from darkness. Ada read it softly. To the one who knows my name, the house is not his. Crispin Bell stepped back, a melodramatic forgery. Lady Octavia's eyes remained fixed on the canvas. My husband always hated this portrait. Who is the woman? Vale asked. No one knew. Mrs. Rowe answered from the doorway, barely above a whisper. Margaret Vale. The inspector turned. My name also, madam, though I do not think we are related. She was a maid here, Mrs. Rowe said. Before my time, there were stories. What stories? That Mr. Marley loved her before he married Lady Octavia, that she disappeared, that she had a child. The fire in the stove gave a soft crack. Philip's face sharpened. A child. Lady Octavia closed her eyes. My husband denied it until the night he died. The torn provenance. Crispin insisted they examine the estate papers. They moved to the library, where green lamps cast pools of quiet light across leather, brass, and old mahogany. The snow outside had thickened, sealing the windows in pale silence. The painting's provenance lay in a blue folder tied with legal tape. Crispin untied it himself, too quickly. Vale watched the knot. Inside were bills of sale, correspondence, and one torn receipt. Its upper half named the portrait. Its lower half had been ripped away where the artist's name should have appeared. Ada held the paper to the lamp. There is an impression, she said, ink pressed through from the missing piece. Vale angled it toward the light. The letters appeared faintly, M. Vale. Philip laughed, but without pleasure. The maid painted herself. No, Ada said. Look at the handling. The painter knew her intimately, but this is trained work. Lady Octavia sat very still. My husband had a younger brother, she said. Julian, an artist, disowned before my marriage. He died abroad, or so we were told. Crispin folded the paper. Old scandals do not alter legal inheritance. No, Vale said gently, but concealed children sometimes do. The footprints in the gallery. At 10:30, the portrait vanished. Only the empty hook remained above the conservatory easel. The glass door stood open to the winter garden, and snow had drifted across the tiles in a narrow white fan. Philip cursed softly. Lady Octavia gripped the back of a chair. Ada looked not at the open door, but at the floor. There are footprints, she said. They led outside, across the terrace, then vanished beneath a yew where snow had fallen from the branches. Vale crouched beside the prince. Too neat, he said. The thief walked out carrying a large portrait through a storm, yet the steps are calm, regular, almost theatrical. He returned to the gallery. Near the empty easel, a smear of dark varnish marked the edge of a table. Behind the velvet curtain, leaning upright in shadow, stood the missing portrait. No thief, Vale said, only a performance. Ada looked at Crispin Bell. The solicitor's face had lost its color. The hidden signature. They brought the portrait back to the conservatory. Inspector Vale asked Ada to clean not the lower corner, but the painted letter beneath the woman's hand. The rest watched in silence as the solvent loosened old darkness grain by grain. A line appeared across the letter's painted seal. Then another. Finally, a full inscription emerged, delicate and unmistakable. Julian Marley, for Margaret and for our daughter Elena. Mrs. Rowe began to cry. Lady Octavia turned toward her. Elena. Mrs. Rowe lowered her head. My mother. Philip stared, then you. Julian Marley's granddaughter, Vale said, and perhaps, depending upon old settlements, nearer to this house than Mr. Philip. Crispin Bell spoke sharply. Impossible, there is no certificate. Lady Octavia looked at him with sudden clarity. You knew. Crispin's silence changed the temperature of the room. Vale lifted the torn receipt. You removed the artist's name. Tonight, when the signature emerged, you staged the theft to discredit the discovery. A missing painting is easier to dismiss than a truthful one. Crispin whispered, I protected the estate. "No," said Vale. "You protected your management of it." The woman in blue. Near midnight, the storm began to quiet. They gathered once more in the gallery, where the portrait hung above the mantel. Firelight moved across the woman in blue satin, softening her face, brightening the painted letter beneath her hand. Lady Octavia stood before Mrs. Rowe. "My husband wronged many people," she said. "I allowed silence to make that easier." Mrs. Rowe shook her head. "I wanted nothing from you." "No, that is why the truth trusted you." Philip, humbled into quiet, poured brandy with unsteady hands. Ada wrapped her cloths and solvents away. Crispin Bell sat apart, watched by Vale, his future already narrowing like a road in snow. Outside, the last thunder faded beyond the hills. Lady Octavia looked up at the portrait. "She does not seem angry," she murmured. "Portraits are patient," Vale replied. "They wait for us to become brave enough to see them." The last stroke of light. At 12, the hall clock struck with slow, golden notes. Snow lay deep across the garden, covering footprints, carriage marks, and every hurried trace of fear. Marley House settled around its fires, old beams creaking gently, as if relieved to have surrendered one secret to the winter night. Ada stood beside Inspector Vale at the gallery door. "The hidden signature was not hidden from shame," she said. "No," Vale answered. "It was hidden for safety. Julian knew the name would matter when someone finally looked closely enough." Mrs. Rowe remained beneath the portrait, her face lifted toward the painted woman who had crossed time in silence to find her. Lady Octavia took her housekeeper's hand. No one spoke of inheritance then. No one spoke of scandal. For a little while there was only the fire, the snow, the soft ticking clock, and the woman in blue, no longer nameless above the mantel. And when the last candle was lowered, the signature still glimmered faintly in the dark, like a truth that had waited 40 years to breathe. Chapter 7. A confession whispered behind the conservatory door. The snow had begun before supper, falling over Larkspur Hall with the patience of an old secret. It gathered on the glass roof of the conservatory, softened the gravel paths, and turned the frozen fountain into a pale, sleeping shape beneath the winter moon. Inside, the house was warm and still. Fires murmured in their grates. Lamps glowed beneath silk shades. In the drawing room, 6 guests sat with brandy, tea, and the polite unease that always attends an invitation too carefully worded. Sir Malcolm Larkspur had summoned them for one reason. "Tonight," his note had said, "a truth long buried will be spoken aloud." At 10 minutes to 11, the conservatory door stood ajar. Behind it, someone whispered a confession. By 11, Sir Malcolm was found dead among the orange trees. The whisper in the glass house. It was Miss Clara Wynne, Sir Malcolm's ward, who heard the voice first. She had crossed the corridor to fetch her shawl when she paused beside the conservatory door. Beyond the frosted panes came the soft rustle of leaves, the drip of melting snow, and a man's voice, low and trembling. "I did it, God forgive me, I did it." Then came the sound of glass breaking. Inspector Julian Morrow, present that evening as an old friend of Sir Malcolm's, reached the conservatory with the others close behind him. He was a slight man with a composed face, watchful eyes, and a voice that made panic seem ill-mannered. Sir Malcolm lay beside a potted orange tree, one hand resting against the tiles. A broken glass cloche glittered nearby. Above him, snow whispered over the roof. Dr. Edwin Hale bent down, then shook his head. "His heart," he said, "or shock." Morrow looked at the half-open door. "And the confession?" Clara's face was pale. I heard it clearly. "Whose voice?" She hesitated. "That is the trouble, Inspector. It sounded like Sir Malcolm's. The orange trees." The conservatory smelled of damp earth, citrus leaves, and coal heat from the little iron stove. Condensation ran down the windows in silver threads. Beyond the glass, the garden lay white and unreachable. Morrow walked slowly between the plants. "There are no footprints from outside," he said. "The garden door is bolted. Whoever spoke was inside the house." Lady Beatrice Larkspur, Sir Malcolm's sister, stood rigid beneath a hanging fern. "My brother had nothing to confess." Her son Victor gave a faint, bitter smile. "Every old family has something to confess, Mother." Mr. Silas Trent, the solicitor, adjusted his cuffs. "This is hardly the moment." Morrow noticed a chair near the orange tree. Its cushion was indented, though no one admitted sitting there. Beside it lay a single white camellia petal, bruised at the edge. "Sir Malcolm wore no flower," Morrow said. Clara glanced toward the drawing room. Mrs. Vale did. Mrs. Amara Vale, a widow and neighbor, touched the camellia pin to her dark gown. One petal was missing. The inspector smiled gently. "Flowers are fragile witnesses. They fall only when disturbed." The sealed letter. In Sir Malcolm's study, a sealed letter waited on the desk. It bore Morrow's name. The room was lined with books, its fire low and blue at the edges. Snow tapped softly at the windows, and the grandfather clock in the hall marked the hour with a solemn tenderness. Morrow opened the letter while the others stood in silence. "My dear Morrow, if I fail to speak tonight, look not for the guilty among those who fear exposure, but among those who fear forgiveness." He read no more aloud. Lady Beatrice frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," Morrow said, "that Sir Malcolm expected danger but not necessarily murder." Clara's eyes filled. "He told me today that someone in this house had lived under a false name." Victor laughed. "That narrows it very little. We all pretend something." The inspector turned the letter toward the lamp. The lower corner was stained faintly green, as though brushed by a leaf. "Written in the conservatory," he murmured. Mr. Trent stiffened. "Many people use that room." "Yes," said Morrow, "but not all of them write farewells there." The broken cloche. The broken glass cloche had covered a young orange sapling, rare and delicate. Morrow examined the fragments on the conservatory tiles. They lay outward, as if struck from within. Dr. Hale crouched beside him. Could Sir Malcolm have fallen against it? "No, the break is too neat." Morrow lifted one shard. On its edge clung a smear of dark wax. "From a candle, or a seal," said Dr. Hale. They searched the room. Behind the iron stove, Morrow found a small brass speaking tube, its mouth hidden by ivy. It ran through the wall toward the service corridor. Mrs. Linton, the housekeeper, gasped. "That has not worked in years." Morrow leaned close. "Yet dust has been cleared from it." Clara whispered. Then the confession was carried through the wall. "Perhaps." He looked toward the corridor beyond the conservatory door. "A voice can travel, mademoiselle. Guilt travels farther." The voice behind the wall. The speaking tube ended in a narrow pantry between the dining room and the servants' stairs. It smelled of cold silver, linen, and extinguished candles. Morrow asked each person to repeat the words Clara had heard. Lady Beatrice spoke with irritation, Victor with theatrical boredom, Mr. Trent with legal dryness, Dr. Hale with embarrassment, Mrs. Vale with a soft, sorrowful tremor. When Mrs. Linton repeated them, Clara closed her eyes. "That is closer," she said. The housekeeper went gray. "I never said such a thing." Morrow held up his hand. "Voices are masks. Fear changes pitch, walls soften edges." In the pantry, beneath folded napkins, he found a cufflink engraved with the initials EH. Dr. Hale looked startled. "Mine, I lost it after dinner." In the pantry, "I helped Mrs. Linton with Sir Malcolm's medicine. The servants were busy." Morrow's eyes rested on him for one quiet moment. "Medicine," he said, "is often trusted more than it deserves." The camellia pin. Mrs. Vale's camellia was not fresh, but silk. Morrow noticed the broken petal had been cut, not torn. Inside its folded fabric was a tiny scrap of paper. On it, in Sir Malcolm's hand, was one word: Eleanor. Lady Beatrice sat down heavily. "That name is forbidden here," she whispered. "Why?" Mrs. Vale answered. "Because Eleanor Larkspur drowned 20 years ago." Sir Malcolm's young wife had vanished during a storm, found days later in the river. The household had called it accident. The village had called it despair. Sir Malcolm had never remarried. "And you?" Morrow asked Mrs. Vale. She looked toward the snow-dark glass. "I was her companion." Mr. Trent cleared his throat. "This is ancient grief." "No," said Morrow. "Ancient grief is quiet. This grief has arranged an evening." The confession repeated. Near midnight, Morrow gathered them in the conservatory. The lamps were dimmed. The stove glowed red. Snow slid gently from the glass roof in soft sighs, and the orange trees stood around them like patient listeners. He placed Sir Malcolm's letter on the chair, the camellia petal beside it, and Dr. Hale's cufflink on the tile. "The confession Clara heard was real," he said, "but it was not spoken tonight." A murmur moved through the room. Morrow touched the speaking tube. Sir Malcolm recorded it earlier using a small phonograph hidden in the pantry. He meant to play it at 11 and force the guilty person to react. Victor stared. A trick. A humane one. He wished for confession without accusation. Mrs. Vale whispered, "Whose confession?" Morrow looked at Lady Beatrice. "Yours." She did not move. "Elinor did not drown by chance," he said. "You followed her into the storm, you argued. She meant to leave Sir Malcolm and reveal that Victor was not the true heir, that Clara, then an infant hidden with relatives, was Malcolm's rightful child. You did not push her into the river, but you left her there after she fell." Lady Beatrice's lips trembled. "I was afraid." The forgiveness Sir Malcolm feared. "Sir Malcolm learned the truth only recently," Morrow continued. "He brought Clara here not as ward, but as daughter. Tonight he intended to forgive his sister publicly, restore Clara privately, and end the lie." Victor's face drained of color. "Then I lose everything." Morrow turned to Dr. Hale. "You knew that? Lady Beatrice told you in panic. You increased Sir Malcolm's heart medicine before the gathering, not enough to seem violent, enough that shock would finish what poison began." Dr. Hale whispered, "No." Morrow lifted the wax-marked glass shard. "You broke the cloche to suggest sudden fright, but the wax came from the seal on the medicine bottle you warmed open and closed again. You left your cufflink where you prepared it." Mrs. Linton began to weep softly. Lady Beatrice looked not at the doctor, but at Clara. "I am sorry," she said, the words almost soundless. The last door opened. The constable arrived after midnight, his coat white with snow. Dr. Hale went quietly. Lady Beatrice remained by the orange tree, older now than she had been an hour before. Victor stood apart, staring into a future that had narrowed without warning. Clara held Sir Malcolm's letter against her heart. Morrow opened the conservatory door fully. Warm air drifted into the corridor, carrying the scent of citrus, damp leaves, and dying coal. Outside the glass, the storm had softened into a gentle fall. The world beyond Larkspur Hall was blank and peaceful, as though waiting to be written anew. Clara looked at the chair where Sir Malcolm had sat. "He wanted forgiveness," she said. "Yes," Morrow replied, "but forgiveness is a door. It cannot be forced open from the outside." From somewhere in the house, the clock struck 1. Its notes moved softly through the rooms, through the pantry, through the conservatory, and into the snowy dark. The confession had been whispered behind a door. The truth at last had opened it. Chapter 8. The secret beneath the butler's white gloves. The snow had been falling since dusk, laying its pale hand upon Alderwick Hall until the house seemed not built of stone, but remembered out of winter itself. Inside, the fires were lit early. Coal glowed in the library, logs whispered in the drawing room, and the long dining room shone with candles reflected in polished silver. At the far end of the table, beneath the portrait of a stern woman in pearls, stood the new butler. His name was Graves. At least that was the name he had given. He wore white gloves so immaculate they appeared untouched by the world. He moved with the quiet precision of a man who had served great houses all his life, yet no one at Alderwick could agree when he had arrived. Lady Miriam Alderwick believed her brother had hired him. Her brother, Sir Julian, believed Lady Miriam had. Mrs. Nettles, the housekeeper, claimed she had found him already in the pantry that morning, polishing spoons as though he had been expected. By 9 o'clock, Sir Julian was dead, and the butler's white gloves remained perfectly clean. The dinner service. Sir Julian collapsed before the second course. There was no cry, no overturned chair, no violence to disturb the elegance of the table. He simply lowered his glass, looked toward the butler standing by the sideboard, and said quite calmly, "You should have stayed buried." Then he died. Inspector Armand Bell, invited for the weekend by Lady Miriam, rose from his chair with the weary grace of a man accustomed to misfortune arriving between courses. "No one is to leave the room," he said softly. The guests sat very still. Lady Miriam with one hand at her throat, young Mr. Edwin Vale staring at his untouched soup, Miss Celia Hart beside the fire screen, and Mr. Fenton Pike, the solicitor, pale beneath his heavy brows. Graves stood apart, silver coffee pot in hand. Bell looked at him. "You served Sir Julian." "Yes, sir." "And the wines?" "I poured for everyone." "Yet he looked at you before he died." "So it seemed, sir." The inspector's gaze dropped to the white gloves. "Remove them, if you please." For the first time, Graves hesitated. The stain that was not there. The gloves came off slowly. Beneath them, his hands were long, narrow, and marked with faint scars across the knuckles. Not fresh scars, old ones. The kind left by rope, flame, or years of work no gentleman would willingly name. Lady Miriam gave a small sound. "You know those hands?" Bell asked. "No," she whispered. "Only they are not a butler's hands." Graves bowed his head. "Few hands remain what they were born to be, madam." Bell examined the gloves. No stain, no powder, no trace of poison. They smelled faintly of lavender soap and cold linen. Dr. Havelock, the village physician, was summoned from the library, where he had been reading by the fire. After a brief examination, he announced that Sir Julian's heart had failed. "Convenient," Mr. Pike murmured. "Convenience," Bell said, "is often where crime chooses to sit." On Sir Julian's napkin, just beneath the fold, Bell found a single black thread. Not from Graves's gloves. From mourning cloth. The locked pantry. The pantry door had been locked during dinner. Mrs. Nettles insisted upon it. She had checked twice, for the best silver had been brought out, including the Alderwick salt cellars shaped like swans. Yet when Bell unlocked the pantry, one shelf stood empty. Not the silver shelf. The medicine shelf. Sir Julian's heart drops were missing, along with a small brown bottle kept for emergencies. On the marble counter lay a shallow dish of water and a white cloth, damp and twisted. "Someone washed something here," Bell said. Mrs. Nettles crossed herself. Not Graves, he was serving the table. Was he serving all the time? No one answered at once. Miss Celia Hart, Sir Julian's quiet ward, spoke from the doorway. "He left before the soup, only for a moment." Graves inclined his head. "To fetch the Madeira, miss." Bell lifted the wet cloth. At its edge was a faint gray smear, almost invisible. "Not poison," he murmured. "Ash." Outside, the wind pressed snow against the pantry window, and the glass gave a soft, secretive tap. The portrait in the hall. The portrait above the staircase showed Lady Augusta Alderwick, Sir Julian's mother, wearing black silk and a watchful expression. Beneath it, a narrow table held calling cards, gloves, and a silver lamp. Bell paused there on his way to the study. A black ribbon lay caught behind the lamp. He lifted it. Lady Miriam looked away. "My mother wore mourning for 30 years, she said, after my elder brother died." "Died?" "Disgraced himself," Mr. Pike corrected. "Then vanished. The family preferred the shorter story." Graves, standing in shadow near the stairs, did not move. Bell looked at him, and what was the brother's name? Lady Miriam answered before the solicitor could stop her. "Thomas." The house seemed to quiet around the name. Even the fire in the hall burned lower as if listening. Bell turned the ribbon in his hand. "Sir Julian's last words," he said. "You should have stayed buried, curious words to speak to a servant." The study drawer. Sir Julian's study smelled of tobacco leather, and the cold iron scent of secrets kept too long in locked drawers. Bell found the drawer beneath the desk scratched around the keyhole. Inside lay old letters, a bundle of banknotes, and a photograph of two boys beside a frozen pond. One boy smiled at the camera, the other looked away. On the back was written, "Julian and Thomas before the fire." "The fire?" Bell asked. Lady Miriam stood by the hearth. "There was an accident in the West Wing. Thomas was blamed, a maid died, my father cast him out." "And Sir Julian inherited?" "Yes." Bell opened another envelope. Inside was a recent letter in Sir Julian's hand. "Thomas lives. Graves is not his name. He comes tonight. I must decide whether truth can still be afforded." Mr. Pike reached for the paper. Bell did not give it to him. Afforded, the inspector repeated, a revealing word. The butler speaks. They gathered in the library, where the fire burned gold and steady, and the snow beyond the windows had softened the world into silence. Graves stood beside the mantel, no longer quite a servant, not yet quite a ghost. "My name is Thomas Alderwick," he said. Lady Miriam closed her eyes. "I returned because Julian wrote to me. He said he wished to confess. The maid did not die by my hand. Julian locked the West Wing door that night as a prank. When the fire started, she could not escape. I was blamed because I had argued with her earlier." "And the gloves?" Belle asked. Thomas looked down at his scarred hands. "The fire burned me when I tried to reach her. Julian could not bear the sight of them. When I came today, he asked me to wear gloves at dinner. He said he would tell the others afterward." Miss Celia whispered, "Then who killed him?" Belle's gaze moved, not to Thomas, but to Mr. Pike. "The solicitor's account." Mr. Pike gave a laugh too dry to be natural. "This is sentimental nonsense. Thomas Alderwick is legally dead. No claim can be made." "No one mentioned a claim," Belle said. The solicitor's mouth tightened. Belle placed the missing medicine bottle on the table. "Found behind the coal scuttle in the study. Empty." Dr. Havelock leaned forward. "Too much of that would stop a weakened heart." Indeed, Sir Julian's usual dose was small. Someone increased it before dinner, knowing excitement would do the rest. Lady Miriam stared at Pike. "Why?" Belle unfolded a ledger from the study drawer. "Because the estate is not merely indebted, it has been quietly emptied. Mr. Pike has managed Alderwick accounts for 20 years. If Sir Julian restored Thomas, old papers would be examined. Old thefts would rise with old sins." Pike's hand trembled. "You cannot prove I touched the bottle." Belle held up the damp cloth from the pantry. "Ash from the solicitor's black sealing wax. You wiped the bottle after warming the seal, but forgot that ash clings more faithfully than fingerprints. The secret beneath the gloves." The constable arrived near midnight, his boots white with snow. Pike went quietly, as cowards often do when the room has stopped believing them. Dr. Havelock covered Sir Julian with a linen sheet. Mrs. Nettles wept into her apron, not for the dead man alone, but for the house that had lied for so many years. In the library, Thomas Alderwick placed the white gloves on the table. Lady Miriam took his bare hands in hers and did not look away from the scars. "I should have known you," she said. "You were a child. I was old enough to remember kindness." The firelight moved over his damaged fingers, over the pale ridges left by flame and time. They were not the hands of a butler. They were not the hands of a murderer. They were hands that had reached once into fire and had been punished for surviving. Belle stood by the window, watching snow cover the dark drive. "White gloves hide many things," Miss Celia said softly. "Yes," Belle replied, "but tonight they hid innocence." The last service. Before dawn, the storm passed. Alderwick Hall rested beneath its white roof of snow, quiet at last, its chimneys breathing into a pale sky. In the dining room, the candles had burned low around the unfinished meal. The silver gleamed. The untouched Madeira waited in its crystal decanter. Thomas entered alone and began clearing the table. Lady Miriam found him there. "You need not do that." He paused, one plate in his hands. "I know." "Then why?" He looked toward Sir Julian's empty chair. "Because service is sometimes how one says farewell to a house that forgot him." She said nothing but stayed beside him. When Inspector Bell left, the first gray light had reached the staircase. Beneath Lady Augusta's portrait, the black ribbon still lay on the table. Lady Miriam picked it up and placed it in the fire. It curled, darkened, and vanished. Outside, snow slipped softly from the branches. Inside, the house settled with a long wooden sigh, as though a door closed years ago had opened at last. And on the library table, untouched by flame or secrecy, the butler's white gloves lay folded like a confession finally set down. Chapter 9. The Man Who Was Never a Butler at All. Snow fell over Whitcomb Hall with a silence so complete it seemed to erase the road behind every arriving carriage. By 8 o'clock, the old house stood alone in the white darkness, its windows golden, its chimneys breathing smoke into the winter air. Inside, the fires were high and the lamps were low. The dining room had been laid with silver, crystal, and winter roses. At the sideboard stood a man in black, calm and straight-backed, his white gloves folded over one wrist. He called himself Mercer. Lady Agnes Whitcomb believed her son had engaged him. Her son believed the housekeeper had. The housekeeper, Mrs. Lyle, insisted the man had presented a letter of appointment bearing Lord Whitcomb's seal. Lord Whitcomb had been dead for 3 years. Before anyone could question the matter properly, the dinner bell rang. And before dessert, the guest of honor vanished. The vanishing at dinner. Mr. Sebastian Vale, collector, financier, and intimate enemy of half the county, had been seated at Lady Agnes's right hand. He had laughed through the soup, frowned through the fish, and gone strangely pale when Mercer leaned near to pour the claret. At 9:15, the lamps flickered. At 9:16, the chair beside Lady Agnes was empty. No door had opened, no servant had crossed the room. Only Mr. Vale's napkin remained, folded with unnatural care upon his plate. Inspector Lucian Bell, invited for the weekend and accustomed to mysteries presenting themselves before coffee, rose without haste. "Please remain seated," he said softly. The guests obeyed, though their faces turned toward the shadows. Mercer stood near the sideboard with the claret in hand. Bell looked at him. "Did you see Mr. Vale leave?" "No, sir." "You were facing the table." "I was attending to the wine." "A useful occupation," Bell murmured. "It encourages others not to look at the man holding it." Lady Agnes whispered, "Where is Sebastian?" From somewhere beneath the floorboards came a faint sound. 3 slow knocks. Then silence. The letter with the dead man's seal. In the servants' hall, Mercer produced the letter. The paper was thick, cream-colored, and faintly scented with cedar. At the bottom lay the red wax seal of the late Lord Whitcomb, a stag beneath a crescent moon. Mrs. Lyle swore she had examined it that morning. "It seemed proper, Inspector. I thought her ladyship had forgotten to tell me." Lady Agnes stared at the seal. "My husband's signet ring was buried with him." "Buried things," Bell said, "have a way of being more traveled than we suppose." He warmed the wax beside a candle and examined its edge. "Pressed recently. The dust is only on the paper, not in the impression." Mercer's face did not change. Bell turned the letter over. On the back, almost invisible, was a smear of black powder. "Coal dust," he said. Mrs. Lyle frowned. "From the cellar." "Perhaps, or from someone wishing to remind us that houses have lower rooms." Above them, the dining room floor creaked. Then came another knock. "Not below now. Behind the wall. The hidden passage." Whitcomb Hall was old enough to have secrets in its architecture. Behind the paneling of the west corridor, Bell found the outline of a narrow door. The latch was hidden beneath a carved rose, polished by recent touch. It opened into a passage smelling of dust, cold stone, and stale air. Lady Agnes held a candle at the threshold. "I was told this was sealed." "It was," said Bell, "until tonight." They moved slowly through the passage. Snow tapped the outer walls. Somewhere above, the house settled with soft wooden sighs. Halfway along, they found Mr. Vale's cufflink. Gold oval, engraved with the letter V. A little farther, they found his watch chain, snapped cleanly. But no Mr. Vale. Mercer followed last, carrying a lamp. In its glow, Bell noticed the man's hands, not servants' hands. The nails were ink-stained, and the fingers bore faint calluses where a ring had once been worn. "Tell me, Mercer," Bell said, "where did you learn to serve?" The man lowered the lamp. "In rooms where silence was expected, sir." "The library portrait." The passage ended behind a portrait in the library. Lord Whitcomb looked down from the canvas, stern and red-cheeked, one hand resting upon a map of the estate. Beneath the portrait stood a locked cabinet. The key was gone. Lady Agnes sat by the fire, shivering despite the heat. "Sebastian came tonight to discuss a sale, my husband's papers, some old debts." "Blackmail?" asked Bell. Her silence answered. In the ashes of the hearth, he found a corner of burnt paper. Only 3 words remained legible: "Not my son." Lady Agnes closed her eyes. "My husband wrote many cruel things." "To whom?" to his ward Nathaniel, a boy he took in, then cast out after accusing him of theft. Mercer looked toward the portrait. Bell observed the movement. "You knew Nathaniel." The man in black did not answer at once. At last he said, "Everyone in the servants' wing knew him. He was kind." The cabinet key. The missing key was discovered inside the claret decanter. Not floating loosely, but tied beneath the stopper with black thread, hidden by the dark wine until Bell lifted it toward the lamp. The guests stood around the library table. Snowlight and firelight mingled over their faces. "An elegant concealment," Bell said, "placed by someone who handled the wine without being questioned." All eyes turned to Mercer. He bowed slightly. "I did handle the wine, sir." "And yet," Bell said, "the thread is from a lady's mourning glove." Lady Agnes looked at her hands. She wore no gloves. Miss Edith Marlowe, Lord Whitcomb's niece, slowly lowered hers. One cuff had frayed. "My glove tore in the carriage," she whispered. Bell opened the cabinet. Inside were estate ledgers, old correspondence, and a miniature portrait of a dark-haired boy. On the back was written, "Nathaniel Whitcomb, acknowledged privately, denied publicly." Lady Agnes rose unsteadily. "My husband's son," she said. Mercer shut his eyes. The man named Mercer. His true name was not Mercer. It was Nathaniel Whitcomb. He had returned that morning dressed as a butler because no other door would have opened to him. The appointment letter was forged, though the seal was genuine. His father's signet ring had never been buried, only hidden by a widow who could not bear the lie and could not confess it. "I wanted the papers," Nathaniel said quietly. "Mr. Vale bought them from Lord Whitcomb before he died. Tonight he meant to sell them back at a price that would ruin her ladyship." Lady Agnes whispered, "I should have told you." "You were afraid." "Yes." Bell looked toward the passage, and Mr. Vale. Nathaniel's voice remained steady. "I did not harm him. He vanished before I crossed the room." Miss Edith gave a short laugh. "People do not vanish from dinner." "No," Bell said. "They are removed, or they perform removal upon themselves." The man beneath the floor. The knocking came again at 10 minutes to 11. Bell returned to the hidden passage and followed the sound, not forward but down, to a trapdoor beneath the old wine stair. There, in a storage hollow no larger than a cupboard, they found Sebastian Vale alive, furious, and bound with his own cravat. His dignity had suffered more than his body. "Who did this?" Bell asked. Vale glared past him. "Edith." Miss Marlowe did not deny it. In the library, she stood very straight, her torn glove held in one hand. "He ruined my father. He had the papers proving Nathaniel's birth and intended to use them to bleed Lady Agnes dry. I only meant to hold him until the documents were safe." "You knew of the passage." "My uncle showed it to me as a child." "And the key in the wine." "To blame the false butler," she whispered. Nathaniel looked at her with sorrow rather than anger. "The papers in the fire." The missing papers had not been destroyed. Bell found them behind the loose back of the library portrait, where Vale had hidden them before dinner, intending to retrieve them after his performance of friendship. They proved Nathaniel's birth, Lord Whitcomb's denial, and Sebastian Vale's long traffic in family shame. Lady Agnes read the first page, then folded it carefully. "These will go to the solicitor," she said. Vale, still rubbing his wrists, smiled thinly. "They are worth a fortune." "No," Bell said, "they are worth the truth. You confused the two." The fire settled low. Snow pressed softly against the windows. In the quiet, Nathaniel removed the black servant's coat and laid it over the back of a chair. Lady Agnes took one step toward him. "My dear boy," she said, and her voice broke upon the second word. Nathaniel bowed his head, not as a servant, not as an intruder, but as a man deciding whether forgiveness could be trusted. The last door opened. Near midnight, the storm eased. Whitcomb Hall grew still beneath its coverlet of snow. In the dining room, the abandoned courses had cooled, the candles had shortened, and Mr. Vale's folded napkin remained upon the plate like a final accusation. Inspector Bell stood in the hall as the constable led Sebastian Vale and Miss Edith Marlowe away by separate doors, one for blackmail, the other for abduction dressed as justice. Nathaniel remained beside the fire with Lady Agnes. "You were never a butler," she said softly. "No," he replied, "but it was the only part the house allowed me to play." Bell lifted his coat from the chair. "Houses are fond of roles," he said. "Fortunately, truth has very poor manners. It enters without waiting to be announced." Outside, the clouds parted enough for moonlight to touch the snow. The old road reappeared, silver and quiet. Behind them, Lady Agnes opened the library door and left it open. And for the first time in many years, Nathaniel Whitcomb crossed the threshold not as a servant, not as a secret, but as the son the house had tried to forget. Chapter 10. Snowfall over Ashcroft Manor at dawn. The snow was still falling when dawn touched Ashcroft Manor. It came down softly, without wind, covering the gravel drive, the frozen lawns, and the dark shapes of the yew trees, as though the night wished to hide every footprint it had made. The old house stood quiet beneath its white roof, its windows warm with the last lamps of a sleepless evening. Inside, the fires had burned low. In the morning room, Inspector Lawrence stood beside the hearth, watching pale light gather upon the silver tea service. No one had gone to bed. Lady Marple sat with a shawl around her shoulders. Colonel Bramwell leaned against the mantel, rigid with fatigue. Clara Venn stared into the embers, her hands folded so tightly they seemed carved from ivory. Sir Edmund Ashcroft lay upstairs, and the secret of his death had not yet settled. At 6:30, the hall clock struck 7. Laurent looked up. "Even at dawn," he murmured, "this house continues to lie about the hour." The clock in the hall. The hall clock was tall, black, and severe, with a moon face that had watched Ashcroft births, weddings, quarrels, and funerals for nearly 2 centuries. Its pendulum moved with solemn confidence, though every guest now knew it had been set 20 minutes fast. Mrs. Vale, the housekeeper, stood beneath it, pale from grief and lack of sleep. "Sir Edmund changed it yesterday morning," she said. "He said time had indulged this family too long." Laurent opened the glass case and touched the pendulum lightly. He wanted everyone to believe midnight came early. "Why?" asked Lady Marple. "To make arrival a matter of conscience." From the staircase came a soft tread. Thomas Ashcroft descended slowly, still wearing the dark coat in which he had returned through the snow. He looked like a ghost reluctantly accepting the duties of the living. "I came before midnight," Thomas said. "Yes," Laurent replied, "but not before fear." The words settled in the hall with the quiet weight of frost. Beneath the clock, melting snow had pooled in a narrow crescent. Not from Thomas's boots. They were dry now, warmed by the kitchen fire. This water had fallen from something carried in later. Laurent knelt. "A hat," he said softly, "or a coat shaken too carefully indoors." The letter never posted. In Sir Edmund's study, dawn entered through the curtains in pale blue stripes. The room smelled of sealing wax, paper, and the faint medicinal bitterness of extinguished candles. On the desk lay letters arranged in precise stacks. Laurent found the one that did not belong, an envelope addressed to Thomas Ashcroft, never sealed, never posted. Thomas stood by the door, unable to cross the threshold. Laurent read aloud only the final lines. "I wronged you first by mourning you too soon, and again by allowing others to profit from your absence. Come before midnight. If you cannot forgive me, at least let the truth arrive in your place." Thomas bowed his head. Clara whispered, "He meant to acknowledge you." "Yes," Laurent said, "and someone understood what that would cost." Mr. Harlan Reed, the solicitor, had been locked in the library under guard since the night's revelation, silent except to ask for water. Yet as Laurent examined the desk, he found something curious. Sir Edmund's private ledger, open to a page of estate payments. A name had been scratched out repeatedly. Not Harlan Reed, S. Clara Venn's. The ward by the window. Clara received the news like a candle taking wind. "My name," she said. Laurent nodded. "Payments made to a trust, large sums over many years." Lady Marple rose. "For Clara, but Edmund always said she had no fortune." "He said many things," Laurent replied. Clara moved to the window. Beyond it, snow covered the terrace where false footprints had misled them through the night. "I was brought here as a child," she said. "Sir Edmund told me my parents were distant cousins, poor, dead." Thomas looked at her sharply. Laurent turned a page of the ledger. "There is a note here, initials only, M.A." "Margaret Ashcroft," Thomas whispered. "My mother." The fire shifted in the grate. Clara's face emptied of color. "That is impossible." "No," Laurent said gently. "It is only inconvenient, which is why it was hidden." Outside, a rook crossed the white sky, its cry thin and lonely in the dawn. The portrait landing. The portrait of Margaret Ashcroft hung on the landing above the stairs. She had been painted in green silk, one hand resting on a book, her dark eyes touched with melancholy. At the lower edge of the frame, nearly concealed by shadow, was a small brass plaque, "Margaret Ashcroft and Child, 1901. The child had been painted out. Miss Clara Venn stared at the blurred patch beside Margaret's skirts. Laurent held a candle close, though morning had come. Beneath the overpaint, the faint outline of a little girl's hand appeared against the dress. "Sir Edmund did not bring you here from charity," he said. "He kept you near because you were blood." Lady Marple pressed her fingers to her mouth. "Edmund's daughter." Thomas answered before Laurent could. "My half-sister." The word seemed to alter the air. Clara swayed, and Thomas caught her arm with a tenderness that surprised them both. From below, the hall clock struck again, uncertain and too soon. Laurent looked toward the sound. "Someone feared Thomas's return," he said, "but someone feared Clara's identity even more." The snow on the threshold. At 7, Laurent asked that every coat be brought to the hall. They were laid across chairs beneath the chandelier. Wool, fur, velvet, and one black overcoat belonging to Harlan Reed. Its hem was damp but not with fresh snow. The moisture smelled faintly of salt and iron. "Road slush," Colonel Bramwell said. "Not road," Laurent replied. "Cellar water." Mrs. Vale gasped. "The old wine cellar floods in winter." The cellar door lay beyond the servants' passage. Its stone steps were slick. At the bottom, among broken crates and dust-dark bottles, Laurent found a second set of boots hidden behind a coal bin. They were too large for Harlan Reed. Too large for anyone except Colonel Bramwell. Bramwell's jaw hardened. "I told you I did not cross the terrace." "No," Laurent said, "your boots did." In one boot, folded carefully, was a torn piece of ledger paper bearing Clara's name. The Colonel's silence. They returned to the morning room, where the fire had been stirred and tea poured but not touched. Colonel Bramwell stood apart, his face gray beneath its discipline. "I did not kill Edmund," he said. "No," Laurent replied, "but you helped conceal what he meant to reveal." Lady Marple looked at him with dawning horror. Bramwell closed his eyes. "Margaret was my sister. Clara was her child. Edmund promised to acknowledge her after Margaret died. Then Thomas vanished and everything became inheritance, scandal, pride. I thought I was protecting the girl from the Ashcroft name." "By allowing her to live as a dependent?" Thomas asked quietly. Bramwell flinched. "Harlan Reed knew," Laurent said. "He managed the trust, he stole from it. Sir Edmund discovered the theft and the truth could no longer remain tidy." "So Reed killed him," Lady Marple whispered. Laurent glanced toward the library door. Reed frightened him, staged the footprints, tried to cast suspicion. But Sir Edmund's heart failed before Reed could force him to sign anything. A crime of cowardice, not design. The firelit confession. Harlan Reed was brought in at last. He looked smaller in daylight. The polish had gone from him, only calculation remained. Laurent placed the ledger, the torn page, and the wet overcoat upon the table. "You knew Thomas had returned. You knew Clara was Sir Edmund's daughter. You knew the trust would expose 20 years of theft. So you entered through the cellar after speaking with Thomas in the orangery. You went to Sir Edmund and demanded silence. Reed's mouth trembled. He was already ill. And you let him die while searching his desk. No one moved. The fire cracked softly. Reed whispered, 'He would have ruined me.' Thomas stepped forward, but Laurent lifted a hand. Ruin is often only truth arriving with witnesses. Clara turned away, not out of pity, but because some revelations are too cold to look at directly. Outside, the snowfall thinned. Dawn had become morning. The first honest hour. At 8 o'clock, Laurent stopped the hall clock. The sudden silence seemed greater than any chime. Mrs. Vale wound it carefully and set the hands back to the true hour. For a moment, the house appeared to hold its breath. Then the pendulum resumed, slow and honest. Clara stood beside Thomas at the foot of the staircase. Between them hung years of absence, deception, and a kinship neither had expected to find before breakfast. "I do not know how to be an Ashcroft," Clara said. Thomas looked up at their father's house, at the portraits, the shadows, the snowlight filling the hall. "Neither do I," he answered. "Perhaps that is our advantage." Lady Marple smiled through tears. Colonel Bramwell bowed his head. Harlan Reed was led away beneath the gaze of every portrait he had ever tried to outwit. Larent opened the front door. Cold morning air entered, clean and sharp. Snow lay over the drive without a single fresh footprint. The world had been remade in white. Behind him, Ashcroft Manor glowed with firelight and uneasy mercy. For the first time in many years, it kept the correct time.